Today, we are going to be looking at plants. First, we're going to be examining the basic characteristics of plants. Plants have four major organs: the roots, stems, leaves, and flowers. So as you can see in the image, these are the roots of the plant, and the roots allow the plant to anchor itself to the soil, and also it absorbs water from the soil. And all of this water is used for different processes, for example, photosynthesis. And each of these roots, they have different root hairs. In this diagram, you can't really see it, but these are the root hairs. So basically, this here is the root. And so on these roots, there are going to be small little root hairs. So the purpose of these roots is to increase the surface area so that it can absorb more water. So if there's water in the soil, now there's more surface area, and so this water can be absorbed in more places. Mycorrhizae are fungi that help plants. They can absorb water and nutrients and give them to the plant, and in exchange, the fungi would give some of the sugars it produces. So basically, there's a mutualistic relationship. That means that both organisms in a mutualistic relationship are benefiting off of each other. Now, after roots, the second part of plants are the stems. So this is the stem. In this plant, you can see this is the stem. And usually stems are above the ground, and they support the plant. They're kind of very strong. Now, in these stems, there are two different things: the xylem and the phloem. The xylem and the phloem. So the xylem and the phloem are two different tube systems inside these stems, and these two systems will be examined in more detail later. Stems can transport water, minerals, and sugars from one part of the plant to another. So water from the roots goes through the stems, obviously, and so they can go to the leaves and other parts of the plant. So if the stem is cut, like if the stem is cut here, now everything above, so all of this whole part of the plant will die. There's no water, there's no nutrients that can get to that part of the plant, so that whole part of the plant would die. So to prevent this from happening, to prevent predators such as worms or caterpillars from eating part of the stem and killing a huge part of the plants have different protective mechanisms such as thorns and spines. There's something known as trichomes, and trichomes are basically small thorns that can contain poison that basically infect any organism that tries to eat the stem of the plant. Now, after the stems are the leaves. The leaves of the plants are where most of the photosynthesis takes place. And each of these leaves contain different pigments. Chlorophyll is the major pigment that plants use, and chlorophyll is the reason that these leaves have the color green, because they reflect green light. The leaves also contain palisades mesophyll, which are tightly packed cells containing chloroplasts, and these chloroplasts absorb light. The palisades mesophyll are surrounded by spongy mesophyll. It's a different type of mesophyll cells. And so these spongy mesophyll cells are dispersed, so there are spaces in between these cells. So imagine this is a plant. This is a plant, and now we're just going in and examining it. So here are the cells in the plant. And so these cells are tightly packed together. But then in some places, there are some spaces, some gaps. So you can see here, these are all the cells, and then there are gaps. So in these gaps, you can see there are some dispersed spaces, and that is because of the spongy mesophyll cells. Leaves also have stomata, and these stomata are openings in the leaf that allow gas exchange, such as taking in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. So this is a diagram of the stomata, and in these stomata, there are two guard cells, and each of these guard cells can either open or close, and that allows gases to pass through the leaf. Leaves can also result in a loss of water through evaporation, and this process is called transpiration. So in this plant, there's water that's coming into the roots from the soil, and then traveling up the plant to different leaves. Now if these leaves are open, and let's say outside is more dry than the inside of the leaf, like there's a lot of sunlight, there's a lot of sun, and that's causing it to be really dry, then water is obviously going to move out of the leaf and into the atmosphere, and so the plant is effectively losing water, and so that process is called transpiration. So the plants do not want this to happen, and so they close the guard cells, preventing any water from leaving the plant. Leaves also contain a cuticle, and here in this diagram you can see there's a cuticle, and that's the part of the plant that has a wax covering. And so this also reduces the transpiration rate because it prevents water from going outside of the leaves. Sunken stomata are stomata that are inside grooves in the plant. So if this was the surface of the plant, that's the surface, usually stomata are just located on the surface like this. But sunken stomata are stomata that go a little bit into the leaf like that. So this is the leaf, and it goes a little bit inside, and that's the stomata, and this is the place where it's opening and closing. So this is beneficial because any wind that blows over the surface of the leaf does not directly come in contact with the stomata because the stomata is down here. In this case, however, when wind blows, it would take any of the water that would fly off with the wind. And so trichomes, which we already said it helps with predators, they can also slow down air movement and increase solar reflection, and as I said, it can secrete toxic substances that make the plant poisonous, and so predators cannot eat the plant's leaves. Flowers are the third part of the plant, and as you can see here, these are the flowers, and here again, the flowers. And so those are the plant's reproductive organs. And here there are eggs and pollen that are produced, and pollination can occur by different organisms such as insects. Wind can also make the pollen travel from one leaf to another, and large animals like bats can also transfer pollen. And so when pollen is transferred from one flower to another, that causes reproduction, which usually creates new fruits or seeds. So now we can examine gas exchange, and as we said before, the stomata is where most of the gas exchange occurs in leaves. So plants absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen, and that's because they need to perform photosynthesis. And so in this process of photosynthesis, the plants create glucose. And the formula for glucose is C6H12O6. And this glucose is then used to create ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, and is the major source of energy for the plant. So carbon dioxide diffuses into the leaf, and when the environment is very hot or dry, then the guard cells will close, which prevent any loss of water from transpiration. So when the guard cells are open, then the carbon dioxide would enter into the leaves, and then they would pass through the spongy mesophyll tissue and enter the water inside the leaf. The carbon dioxide in the water would then diffuse into all the cells that are inside the leaves, and this would allow the cells of the plant to perform photosynthesis. And then there's oxygen. Oxygen would diffuse into the roots of the plant from the soil. So there's just oxygen floating around in the soil, and the oxygen would basically go into the roots and into those cells, and it would move from gas-filled pores in the soil to roots in the plant, and then up to the cells in the leaves or in other places of the plant, and that's where cellular respiration would occur. So pretty much, photosynthesis takes in carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water, and generates glucose. And then, in cellular respiration, this glucose is used to create ATP. And so in this way, the plant can generate its own food. So unlike plants, us humans, we cannot do photosynthesis, and we can only do cell respiration. So the only way we can get glucose is by eating other plants or animals. Now we can take a closer look at stomata control. And so we already know that there are guard cells that control whether the stomata is open or closed. But the process that controls whether the stomata are open or closed is very complicated. So what happens is first an electrical gradient is formed. So the guard cells are pumping out hydrogen protons, hydrogen ions. And so these ions are pumped out through ATPase proton pumps. You can see ATPase ATPase is also found in cellular respiration, but in plants, what happens is that, let's say this is the membrane, and this is the ATPase. Now what this ATPase does is it takes hydrogen ions, so this is the inside of the leaf, and this is the outside. It's not leaf, it's left. And then this is the outside of the leaf. So the hydrogen ions would go outside the leaf, exiting the leaf. And so that would create an electrical gradient across the cell membrane. And then potassium ions would flow into the guard cells. So then there's potassium ions that flow into the guard cells. And so this gradient of potassium, so there's a high concentration of K in here, and there's a low concentration of K plus here. And it's now this gradient drives osmosis, which causes water to enter into the cell. So water would go into the cell, and that would cause the guard cells to become turgid. And so when they're turgid, then they would take this shape, and so it would open the stomata, allowing gases to pass into and out of the leaf. And then when the stomata need to close, then water starts to flow out of the guard cells. Basically the opposite process as shown here.